Well, with us in the studio now, Josh Garman, whom you saw in that film, co-founder of the direct action group Plain Stupid, and John Hanlon from the European Low Fares Airline Association. John Hanlon, do you concede there is a problem?
We concede that aviation is contributing its effect to the environment, the problem of carbon emissions.
And do you think that problem is made better or worse by 10p flights to Eastern Europe?
Well, we don't favour the offset scheme in principle because
no, I'm not asking you that. I'm asking you whether the encouragement provided through cheap airfares makes the problem better or worse.
I think the encouragement of travel through cheap airfares is actually not necessarily in conflict with the measures to mitigate the effect on the environment. There is, around the corner, there's an emissions trading scheme for the European Union, which we are very strongly in support of.
OK, we'll come to that in a moment or two. You think the solution is to prevent people taking holidays, do you?
Well, that's what the science dictates. You know, the Tyndall Centre report last year, and now this report from Oxford University, says we have to curb the amount of air travel in order not to change the climate.
So you want people not to take holidays on by
Well,
plane?
It's fundamental that we reduce the amount we fly.
To what?
Well, we could start by ending the short-haul flights that we're binge flying.
So none of us should take short-haul flights?
Well, the majority, yeah, we shouldn't be flying on short-haul distances to places easily reachable by train, which is over 10 times less polluting. You know, 185 million people to die in Africa this century alone because of climate change, and people are still hopping over to Barcelona for the weekend and saying, sorry, it's part of our way of life.
And how do you propose to stop people taking short-haul flights?
Well, I mean, the government could start by introducing the recommendations of the Environmental Audit Committee, like green taxes. But in the meantime,
just make it a lot more expensive?
Yeah, that would be a good start. But also, at the moment, the government, rather than reining in the industry, is trying to encourage growth through airport expansion and these sort of subsidies for the industry.
Will you at least engage with that?
I think the missing from this debate, I admire the enthusiasm and commitment of the Action Direct.
Oh, you're patronising him now?
No, I'm genuinely in admiration of the commitment. I just wish it was more dimensional, and I would like to see some consideration of the balancing factors of socio-economic development, which aviation is a big enabler of.
How do you balance a stag weekend in Prague against millions of people dying in Africa?
The people who take leisure trips abroad have made their own informed choices about their lifestyle, and they may well be deciding to offset that in other forms of consumption, which they are free to do. And I think the European Union was founded to actually create mobility among the peoples of Europe. They should enjoy it, and aviation's played a valuable role in bringing that about.
75% of people who take these flights are in social groups A, B and C. This isn't about poor people taking one holiday a year. This is about rich people flying regularly. The average second homeowner in Spain takes 6 flights a year. Meanwhile, the residents of Tuvalu, an island nation in the South Pacific, watch as their entire nation goes underwater. Can you imagine if Britain was going underwater? I mean, what do you consider to be a safe level of atmospheric CO2? And do you think we can do it whilst having a 300% increase in the amount of air travel by 2030? The Oxford University scientists don't think so, and you do?
We don't recognise the forecasts that you're giving. We are currently 3% of EU total carbon emissions. Yes, I know they are, but they are basically a report that is actually more of a compilation of pre-existing reports.
So the scientists
are
wrong.
Which are in conflict.
So the scientists are wrong.
Certainly in the forecast by 2050 that we read in today's published report, we do not support that, and we do not see it as correct.
So Oxford University and the Tyndall Centre are wrong.
The Tyndall Centre concedes that in extrapolating the growth of aviation, they assumed the transfer to the long-haul sector of what they've seen in the way of growth in the European sector. That is not on the horizon for any low-fares airline. It doesn't fit the business model. It's a major flaw in the basis of that forecast.
Would you concede that at the very least we should have a halt to airport expansion?
No, I think that the way we'd like to see it going is something to actually, for example, aviation at the moment, 12% of its emissions are caused by inefficient air traffic control management in Europe. That's well within the gift of government to seize hold of and do something about. We've got 36 different systems in operation.
So you don't think the scientists considered that when they were writing these reports? They didn't consider the techno-fix solutions? Of course they did, and I didn't see the paragraph saying if we plant some trees or if we make the planes more energy efficient, then we'll be able to solve climate change. And that's because the science says you can't do that.
I think I could be forgiven for thinking that the objective of today's report was to actually promote reduction in demand above all other solutions, and we have seen a very, very dismissive consideration of emissions trading.
You were part of this group that disrupted, it was East Midlands Airport the other day, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was spokesman for the group.
Who gives you the right to do that? If people want to lead a different lifestyle, they will do so, or they will vote for a party at election time that advocates a different way of living.
But we are the last generation of people who could feasibly tackle this problem. We're in the midst of a global planetary emergency. The scientists tell us we possibly have 5 years.
You made it clear that's your view, but what gives you any right to impose your view on other people?
It's not my view, it's what the science says. And if the science says we have to act in the next 5 years, we don't even have until the next general election.
And that gives you the right to disrupt other people's lives as much as you like?
Well, Britain has a long and noble history of direct action protests, from the suffragettes through to the anti-Rose movement of the 90s. And you know, people like Jon Snow on Channel 4, Peter Hain, these are all people who have engaged in direct actions, and yet all of their causes fade into insignificance compared with the threat we face from climate change. So I think in 10 years' time, or even now in Bangladesh and Tuvalu, they don't consider us the extremists. They consider John over here the extremist.
Okay, could I just bring us back to the perspective issue that I introduced at the beginning? We represent 3% of total EU carbon emissions, road transport 27, domestic 20. By 2050, the doomsday scenario that you refer to in this report, we will represent 5% of total EU carbon emissions. Scientific forecasts by very creditable scientists. So I wonder how...
But these statistics are misleading.
I'm going to interrupt you there. Thank you both very much indeed.